everyone. Welcome back to Life Unpotted. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about something that I have struggled with a lot in my life and something I still struggle with today as I'm recording this episode. It's why do we take things so personally? Why do we always assume that other people are thinking about us? It can range from when you're at work and you think that your boss is really mad at you, or your coworkers are mad at you, or you think your partner is upset with you, or your friends. It's the narratives that we create in our heads about how we think the situations are going, when a lot of the times these narratives are just not true. And they're just that, in our head, in our minds, self-created. And we have been learning that there's so many different reasons why we might take things personally, but a few of them being that we're just not connected to ourselves, that we have insecurities that we haven't addressed, that we perceive a division between us and other people, and this division creates a level of separateness that makes us think that other people are talking about us or other people don't like us. Ultimately, it comes back to us. We need to reframe our perspective. We need to reframe those narratives so that we can really see what is happening in reality. As we're able to move outside of our minds into the body, we're able to peel back these narratives, question them, and understand them, and ultimately realize that a lot of the things that we think are happening are not really happening. So let's just kick this off. Daisy, do you feel like you take things personally?
I think it depends on what state of energy I'm in, whether I'm like feeling really good and aware of how I'm feeling, or if I'm like feeling not too good. I think it can go both ways, but I think I've gotten better at it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like you said, it kind of depends. If I am in a really good mood, it's almost as if I have a stronger wall surrounding me, that if somebody walked into the room, if I'm at work, for example, and I think work is kind of a good place to talk about this, because for me, that's where I experience the most. So let's just take the example of your coworker comes in and is not as energetic as they were the day before. If I'm in a super good mood, I probably won't notice it as much, but I think it's the times when I'm more upset that I feel more prone and I guess more vulnerable to somebody else's energy and the way that they're acting, and therefore the more that I feel impacted by the way they are acting.
I feel like that's so true. I think it's because, like, in a way, when you see that, you want to project how you're feeling on them, because if they're like already giving off that kind of energy, like you're like, oh, there's a place I can dump it. I think subconsciously that might be what's happening.
So you mean that, like, if your coworker walks in and you, because you're not feeling good, you assume then that they're feeling good, not feeling good either. And some of that could be a result of you wanting to project your feelings onto somebody else. I think that's really true, because I've been thinking about this a lot. For example, like when I'm not in a good mood and I get an email and for some reason it just rubs me the wrong way and I just feel like that person's mad at me and I assume that they're mad at me. I think that a lot of the time I'm just projecting how I'm feeling onto the situation and then therefore assuming they're feeling that way. But that's not true, because I can't assume that I know that how they're feeling because this person never expressed it to me.
That's a dicey thing, projecting how you're feeling onto how you think someone else is feeling, assuming because you feel this way or you felt this way, you think you know how they're feeling, and so you project that onto them. You know, it's like when you think you're aware of how you're feeling, you think you can be aware of others, but in my experience, it can be misleading, because when you have a certain feeling within you that's really a negative energy or negative feeling, it's easy to assume that someone else is feeling that way, because that's where your head goes to first when you see that someone isn't how they normally are.
Right.
So that's what I mean by dicey.
I'm trying to think of a good way to kind of paint the picture. I think like it's almost like we all walk around in the world living in our own bubbles, our own sense of our own consciousness that we're in. I mean, I guess that we all share consciousness, because like right now I'm perceiving what's happening and you're perceiving it. So we're sharing it. But whatever you're experiencing in your mind, whatever energy your body's feeling, that kind of is based on old experience you've had today or old experience you've had your whole life. So
it shapes my perspective.
It shapes your perspective. So it's almost as if, how can you separate what you're feeling based on what your feeling state and your perspective versus understanding how somebody else is feeling, to know that you're not just feeling your own little bubble of energy state of negativity and projecting onto them? How do we know? It's really confusing, because sometimes it's like I don't even know what I'm feeling or what someone else is feeling. But I just want to respond to that, to my own comment, by saying that I think a lot of the times when you're in your head, When you're in your head, you will be stuck more into this narrative you created. And then when you're stuck in a narrative, you're going to project that onto somebody else. But when you're in your body more and you're not in your mind, you have the ability to really be open and receptive to that other person's energy state. And you can kind of pick up, oh, okay, maybe they're not mad at me. Maybe that's just how I'm feeling. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I think what you're describing is when you're dysregulated, it's hard to pick up on how other people are actually feeling.
What does it mean for you to exist in a state of not feeling regulated?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've spent a lot of my life being dysregulated. And the way that I see that is like living in a false reality of who you think you are because you perceive the world differently. So you interact with it differently. You see different potentials, and when your perception is different, like your entire experience is different because that's kind of what you're putting out there to get back. So dysregulation is an interesting one because it's definitely changed on what it means to me over the years. I think as I've worked through emotional things more, I've learned that it's just a state, like emotional dysregulation. If you're having any sort of negative thoughts about yourself or fears or anxieties, that likely means that you're in a dysregulated state. So you have to come back to your body. And I think that's what it really means to me is like the antithesis of dysregulation is being in the body. And because being in the body, ultimately, it makes you face whatever is dysregulating you and it helps reground you. So I think ultimately when it comes to dysregulation, it just means that your body, for me, it means my body is out of whack. Something isn't getting met. Some sort of need isn't getting met, whether that's physical rest, emotional rest, or just like giving nurturing to yourself. Like it's just a state of being in that you have control over of changing.
For me, being not regulated is kind of not being present, where I'm stuck in my mind, stuck in a state of resistance, not really wanting to be here, holding on to something. And I think it's kind of exactly what you said. It's like when your needs aren't being met. When your needs are not being met, you might be more likely to project how you're feeling onto other people. And therefore, you're more likely to make assumptions because your needs aren't met. Your needs aren't met. So how can you really exist in the world and really be there and really be present if you feel like your needs haven't been met?
I think that happens a lot.
And I think it happens more than we think, right? Like it's like you're at work. Like this happens to me so many times when I'm at work where I wake up really tired that day. I just don't really feel good. Either I just like didn't sleep well the night before, or our body, our energy states are constantly in flux. And there are days when we're just not going to feel good, right? And in those days when I'm just not feeling good, it's so easy to hear what somebody else says to me and take it so personally to the point where I'm just like, I suck at what I'm doing, or my boss doesn't like me, or I'm going to get fired. That's a huge one. I think subconsciously a lot of time I'm scared I'm going to get fired. And I create these narratives that I know what other people are thinking, and I'm convinced that I know what other people are thinking. And I think that is the danger to highlight. It's that like we truly think that we know what other people are thinking when we make these assumptions, and that's dangerous because that is just your own mind. That is your own story. And the more you cement that, the more you're going to start believing that people at work actually don't like me. People at work think I'm a failure. And it's like, how they even thought about you?
That's really interesting. Like I thought of something to challenge that. If like you might think you're getting fired for a reason that is not steeped in any sort of reality or anything that's happened, flip, like test yourself. If like you start, like I think it's easy to start to attach to an identity of like, I'm anxious and I'm gonna get fired. This is how I am at work. This is how I am at work. And changing that and flipping it on its head and saying, I'm so valued. Like I'm valued and I'm going to interact with my job that way.
It's so interesting because once we switch our inner dialogue, our entire environment switches. And it goes back to what we were saying about how our experience in this world is entirely based on our own little bubble, our own consciousness. So you're in control of how you're perceiving things. So if you're saying, all of a sudden you start telling yourself, I'm really valued at work, nothing externally has changed from a week ago when you thought that your boss hated you to a week later. They might have not even thought about you. The only thing that changed was the way you were viewing yourself.
Yeah. And it depends how deep these things are, right? I don't know on the spectrum of like really freaking deep to like really shallow, getting fired would feel in your body.
What do you mean deep to shallow?
I think everyone has a level of things that like will trigger them to get really mad that are really deep seated. And that could be something like in your childhood or in like relationships, things that have like occurred over and over and over that really just get you riled up. On the shallower spectrum, like it's someone like cuts you off when you're walking and like you get annoyed about that. So I think it's important to start on the shallower end with this pushing back of narratives or fears that you have and flipping on its head, because like it's gonna be hard to jump straight to like the deep end and start to challenge these feelings I have. But I think a good way to put it is like with the job example of like taking it from I fear I'm gonna get fired to knowing that I'm valued is reframing it.
That makes a lot of sense. And this makes me think of the example of what your boss says to you, I just want to talk over a few things from the assignment you sent me or the task or working on or project you're building. And your head, you assume, oh, I did such a bad job, right? I did such a bad job because your insecurity is that you're not smart, that you're not capable, that you're not worthy. But in reality, your boss actually wants to talk to you because he wants to help you grow. And he wants to help you, or they want to help you improve at your job. Makes you feel like maybe you're in trouble, but all they're saying to you is, I want to talk, because you live in a narrative that you've created that when this certain set of circumstances happen, this means XYZ, that you're not good enough, that you're a failure, whatever. When in reality, the other person, all they're trying to do is help. But you can't see it through that lens because you're so caught up in this narrative of insecurity you've been fighting your whole life that you're projecting onto the situation.
And that's why in relationships with romantic relationships or bosses or managers, it's so important to just get things out on the table. Not necessarily saying like, whenever you want to talk to me, I think that I did something wrong. Like maybe not clearly stating it like that because I have a complex that I'm not good enough. Like
right, like there's different settings for different things.
Yeah, but I think work is a great place, and this is where I think managers get set apart. Is there are managers that are really good at making you feel comfortable and valued and have a good when you have a good relationship with your manager or your boss or upper management, it makes the entire experience different.
Yeah.
But when you have more of like an authority figure manager, it's more difficult to have those open conversations because it's clear that there's a dynamic of upper and below. And I think inherently, like when we think of like as kids, generally, when our parents are like, hey, do you want to go talk in the corner? I don't think you do. So get your act together. Like I think we associate like that like something like that specifically with a negative experience. Like we're in trouble. I think that's a widely felt thing from how kids are just kind of punished and regulated and controlled. So the more comfortable you are with the other person, the better you are at reframing it. But I would also challenge that to wonder, no matter who you're talking to, how do you reframe it with yourself first?
I have a lot of things I want to say to that. I think first, it's like on the line of making assumptions. To help burst the bubble of an assumption, you can talk to the person that you have the assumption with. In this setting where you have that relationship and you feel comfortable talking to them, right? So then you take the boss example. You have the boss, whose personality, or someone you work with who just is inherently like just feels more negative. They don't actually think anything bad about you, but they just are, and therefore you feel like you can't go to them. So I have two questions about this. Number one, how do you handle it when you don't have the relationship with someone where you can be open with them and you can't tell them, well, you know what, Matt, like I actually feel hurt by this because I feel like you're judging me. So that's one situation. And the second comment is, why do we think we can never be honest with anyone? Why is it that you can't be honest with your boss? Is that a construct? Or is that professionalism? Is this something we should challenge, that you should be able to tell your boss things? Where do you draw the line of like, I'm not going to sit there and have a therapy session with my boss, but I'm going to tell them, hey, I just want to let you know, like when you kind of respond to me like this, it makes me feel like that you don't think my work is good. But what do you think?
I think the first relationship that you're going to always be interacting with, no matter who you're interacting with, is always yourself. So it can be more challenging when you don't feel comfortable talking with someone about how your dynamic is, what they're actually thinking about you, when in reality it's not actually that. I think in that experience, like you really have to condition yourself to think through the situation. I think you have to like really think, okay, this is what they're asking of me. What does that really mean? And go deeper of like, why do I have this fear associated with this? I think that's something you definitely do on your own. Like you have to do that on your own and really push back on, why does this make me uncomfortable? What am I really afraid of? And I think that's a lot of the times going to bring us back to the point of like, what do you really have to lose? Why is this very small blip of an incident causing so much anxiety? Take yourself out of it and really think, if I die tomorrow, this is silly. I shouldn't even be worried about this. I think getting in the habit of walking yourself through situations when you feel pressured or like on the fly with someone.
On that realm, it's also so important to ask yourself, why do I assume the worst thing? If there's a scale of things you can think, the first one being, oh, my boss is in a bad mood because something could be happening in his personal life. Why do we go all the way to the other end and say my boss doesn't like me? I think that's because we always think that people are thinking about us. We always think that people are thinking about us. And therefore, when something doesn't line up to our expectations, we assume it's because they don't like us. But that person has their own life. Like, we almost forget that other people have their own lives. Like your boss, what if his partner's going through something? What if he's going through something? I remember there was So there's a Tara Brach podcast where she talks about this example where this guy came to her. He owns a company or he's a boss and he was struggling with his employee. Came to her and was like, I really don't like the way that I keep judging this person. I feel like really angry about them. I feel like they're frustrating me. And then basically she had him end up talking to him and he found out that his wife had cancer. The employee's wife had cancer. And then all of a sudden, the boss's entire perspective changed, that this guy who he's created this whole narrative about is going through one of the most difficult things you could probably go through in this human experience. What does that say, right? That says that like so much of these assumptions we make, why don't we question instead of thinking that person doesn't like us? Why don't we ask, maybe they're going through something. Maybe they're experiencing something really hard. And if we were in that boat and whenever I am having a bad day or something, it's hard. It's hard to really be there. So it's stepping outside, thinking about ourselves and to recognize it's not about us all the time. And that can help you, I think, take you outside of this. I always think back to the Fight Club analogy. At the end of the scene of Fight Club, you just see him in the parking lot and he's fighting himself. And I think that's what this all goes back to, right? It's like we're fighting ourselves. We're creating narratives about the things that we think are true and they're just not, and we're just fighting ourselves. And exactly like you said, when you're in a situation where you don't know how to interact or talk to that person, it all comes back to you and you have to ask yourself, what is really up here?
It's funny how we have the initial reaction to always think it's about us. And it is humbling when you find something out like the guy did in the book where someone who he thought hated him, his wife was actually had terminal cancer. So that changes your perspective. That like wakes you up and makes you realize it's not all about me. But why does it take that kind of experience for us to have that kind of realization, for it to get reframed essentially?
Yeah, why does it take such a drastic...
Does it take something extreme for us to get out of our own heads about thinking about ourselves?
I think sometimes it does. Like, think about when you find out that somebody you know is sick, like someone in your family, or like I've experienced where a grandparent I found out is like gonna die. And it's almost as if like everything goes away. Every idea you have about yourself, every narrative you have about yourself, everything goes away because you come out of this illusion you've been living in. You come back to reality. You remember that we're living on this earth, that I'm gonna die, and then all of a sudden it's like you're sobered up.
Well, it brings you back to this actual moment.
Right. And you're like sobered up from this delusion you've been living in. You're like, whoa, okay. And it talks about a lot in The Power of Now, where when something's wrong, we immediately enter the present. Isn't that interesting? That it takes...
Well, define when something's wrong.
I don't know. It's a good point, because there are times we respond in fight or flight or in anxiety, but let's say like you find out like someone, like your family member just died, passed away.
Mm-hmm.
In those situations, you feel the most like present, the sober feeling of like every emotion's coming over you and you just remember nothing matters. I do think that because we live in our head, because we live in these narratives, it does take these situations sometimes to wake us up, but it doesn't need to. And I think that's the point we need to get across. It doesn't need to take extreme situations for us to wake up.
Well, it doesn't. But there has to be something that's helping you get out of your own head. Whether that can be something as simple as going on a run or working out. Things that don't have to be bad per se in your life, but they can help you get into the present moment and get out of your head. So I think there are like little things like that can help implement it on like a visceral level that help you start to recognize it on a psychological level. Because ultimately this is a practice of being able to push back on emotions and thoughts that come up on your end and allowing yourself to not have to listen to those things that come up. And that can go hand in hand with also being able to be there for someone for what they're actually going through or what's actually happening, or if they're just being themselves, allowing you to just be with who they are and not putting some sort of projection on it. I think ultimately taking care of yourself, taking care of your ability to be in the moment, it's going to help you see people as they actually are without your own projections on them.
And by doing that, we can stop taking things so personally because we realize it's actually not about us. And that's really freeing to recognize. And like, even as I'm talking about this right now, because I really still struggle with this a lot. I'm like, whoa, like what if that situation at work, like it really wasn't about me? What if like, you know?
Yeah. Well, something my dad always told me was like, if you feel like you're having a bad day or you feel like your life is upside down, go and volunteer. Go to a soup kitchen. Like, I think being in a situation where you're helping someone, it's going to reconnect you with everyone and realize it's not about you, that it's about a larger purpose. You're not different than the person next to you, no matter how differently you dress or different career or different like lifestyle. You're not any different. And I think getting to a place where you're volunteering, where you're coming together for the greater good, it takes you out of your own head and it reconnects.
So it's kind of just recognizing unity, right? Recognizing that like we exist out of the same composition, every single human being existing. And there's been so much division, so much separation that's been created over the years that literally is a reason that results in wars, that results in tension, results in issues between different types of religion, is because we perceive ourselves to be separate than everybody else. But when you really zoom out and you really recognize that we are actually all connected, we are all the same. It's just these ideas that we've created, these narratives we created that separate us. It always comes back to breaking from the narratives, right? And exactly like you said, when you break from them, you can recognize that, whoa, like we are all connected and I don't need to form this huge opinion or assumption about what's going on because number one, it might not be around me. And number two, maybe I should have some sympathy for what maybe you're going through without thinking about myself.
I think it feels quote unquote good to be stuck in your world. Everything's about you. Like you think that feels good because whether that's familiar or habitual, when you're able to put that aside and really show up for someone else or, really just show up for someone else, like that feels really good. Like a different level, the feelings aren't comparable. Like you realize how miserable it feels to be stuck in your own head, not thinking about anyone else but yourself.
We're so stuck in the negativity bias. We're so stuck in negative thinking that because we're used to that, we think it feels good. But in reality, like how much better does it feel when you just are connected with someone? Where do you think this comes from in our upbringing that where does it come from that we think that we have to have this guard up, that we have to be thinking about ourselves all the time to kind of survive? Like, is it a survival mechanism?
Definitely. It definitely is. And it's hard to pinpoint it, honestly, because I think it starts at a young age. I don't know. I think school, we are tested at a very early age and we pass or we fail. We get a good grade or we get a bad grade. We get in trouble if we get a bad grade. I feel like that's a widely experienced thing that impacts us to think about ourselves like versus someone else. I don't know. I think that I think it's multifaceted, but I think that's one component.
Yeah, because I think when we're so caught up in the reward system chase of looking, because we're so scared almost that we go through this educational system at such younger years where like our value is derived from our grades we get. There's so much pressure put onto ourselves that we almost don't even have time or space to think about other people in our younger formative years because we're just trying to get by. And I think that as you go and you enter adulthood, if you don't do self-reflection, if you're not thinking about these things, you're going to be stuck in that. And that's going to create division and separation because you're always going to be living in fight or flight. You're always going to be living thinking that you have to get something, you have to achieve something. And it's not until you let that guard down and realize, no, I'm safe, I'm okay, I don't need anything, that you can actually connect with other people. And then the assumptions stop.
Yeah, it's funny because the biggest lie that we were ever told was that if you do bad on the SATs, like your life is fucked.
So black and white. It's
make or break right here. And that's why I feel like all of high school was like, it was all preparing for that moment of getting to college. That's going to make you push someone down so that you can get up. Like that mentality of that pressure of like, you have to do well, you need to do well, everyone else is doing well. Like that is not collective, that's individualistic. And I honestly don't think that does any help. I think that's harmful.
I would like to talk to someone from a different country about like the collectivism versus individualist approach, because definitely America, definitely New York City, that it's like every man for himself. Like you see people outside, you see the way that people are going so fast, going to work, like, because then you get to work and it feels like it's you against the world. And that's why you have to live in your head, because you feel like you can't come back and be present because everybody else is stuck in their head too. So you're, you know?
It's interesting. Like there is an extreme. I was at a museum and there was an exhibit being done on this like Irish author. And they were talking about this, which is really interesting, of what's better, individualism, collectivism. And, you know, it's not one or the other. It's a combination, because in a way, like individualism, it is good for our society. Like people come to New York because they're motivated and they want to create things. Like they leave their families behind. Like this guy was an Irish immigrant and came to New York. His family wanted him to do something that was in the family business, and no one got him in his town. No one understood the way he thought. He came to New York to become an author. And in a way, like that is like the simplest way of looking at individualism, is that I'm not collective with my family. I'm an individual on my own. So I think there's a lot of facets of looking at it, but I think more so like what we're trying to talk about is not taking it to the extreme. Like I think that's maybe what I just said is kind of totally different, but it's just a different interpretation of it.
No, but it makes sense that it's not that we should not ever think about ourselves, right? It's not that we should always be thinking about other people. It's like everything, you have to strike a balance. You have to find that balance to know when situations are appropriate to be thinking about ourselves, when is it rational to be, okay, I need to think and figure out what are my goals this year, right? What are my self-growth journey look like? But when I'm in a situation talking to somebody else, it's not about me. It's not about what they think about me, because this is not one of the situations. So I think, like you're saying, there's a time and place for everything. But what we do is we so often always think every time is the place to think about ourselves, and that's what leads us to suffer.
Every second of every day. Right.
I don't want to forget about the other question I asked.
Okay.
Because I think it's interesting
Come back
to talk
to
about.
it. Re-ask it.
It's basically like, do you think that in the work setting that you should be able to be open with people that you work with? Do you think it would ruin the way that you have connections, or could it strengthen them? And obviously it's not black and white. Like obviously, like we said, it's not like you're going to be crying to them, but should you be able to communicate stuff with them?
Definitely. And that already exists. In a lot of worlds it does. In a lot of worlds it doesn't.
So just a preference, like I'm in a corporate, I work at a law firm, you work at a startup sales company. So we have very different job.
Yeah, we see it very
descriptions.
Like, our experiences are very different. Because for me, work is very casual, and people are seen as what they are. No one has to put acts on to try and be a certain way. Whereas for you, there's a hierarchy. Everyone has to fit into that hierarchy, and that's how everyone's personality interacts with other personalities, is based off where you're at in the hierarchy.
That's all your personality kind of is in a lot of these corporate worlds, is just like where you, like exactly said, where you are in this hierarchy.
So talking about being able to express yourself is very different situation with your experience versus with my experience.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even, it's hard to even talk about, because like, yeah, of course you should be able to, say what's going on with your life, and with positives, right? You shouldn't feel like you can't share something with work because you feel like they're going to come back and use that against you. Like that's my opinion, but that's with my experience, like working in like an open culture that's supportive generally, and having manager that understands that your only intention is not just to wake up and achieve for this job every day, right? That's part of it, but there's so much more to that.
Yeah.
So I think they're different experiences. Like there's the on the other end of it where you have to be a negative thing happens, it's impacting your work. I think there's ways that you can talk about it, but I don't think it has to be like a big dump of this and that. I think it has to be strategic, but I think you shouldn't be afraid to be able to have to share certain things at work.
Right.
But there has to be a line where you can't share too much, because that would just be too much.
I think just to conclude that question, because if you are in an environment where it feels uncomfortable, and I always encourage entering into discomfort, but there are situations in which, like if you work at a corporate firm, that is not the culture. I think in those situations, it is recognizing that it has to just go back to you, because I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, in those situations, if the lack of openness is not working for you, know that it exists in other places that you can work. But in the meantime, if you're still working there, know that it has to just come back to yourself to understand that, like, even if people around you are really tense and doing all these things, that it doesn't have to do with you. And it doesn't have to do with you. That is kind of the theme of this whole conversation about taking things personally and assuming things, is that the more that we're able to step outside of our heads, the more that we're able to really be here and not so caught up in our own minds, the more that we're able to understand that, oh wow, the assumption that I thought was pure fact was just a narrative not really existing in reality. And when you come back to reality, you come grounded, you go, oh, okay, well, it actually is not even like that at all.
Yeah, you see it in an entirely different light. And I think that's the point exactly, is that that's the goal. That's the place to be. That's where you want to be.
I think for me, what's been really helpful for me is when I starting to recognize, like, find the gap between something happening, like, you know, my boss not responding to me that I want, and then really analyzing, wait, why did I respond that way? And I think sometimes it could feel so ingrained that it's hard to find that space. So I think just being more aware of these responses will give you the space to really analyze and think. Each time, question it, write it down in your journal, on your phone, start keeping track of all of these situations where you start feeling like someone's mad at you or someone's upset with you. All of these situations where you're making assumptions, because you can start to realize, oh wait, it actually was not about me, or nothing really bad happened, or next week I felt differently. Why? Because I was less in my head. So I think finding the space to question your thoughts, it always comes back to questioning your thoughts, can help you to recognize and get to a place where you're more grounded so that you can see your pattern. We talked about another episode, habitual thought processes, to know that that's just a habit, assuming that things are about you. And then you could break that by being open, by being here, by being grounded, and by being present.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as you question the thoughts, that's when they cease to exist. They can't go any further when you question them. They may have gotten to where they're at, but they can't go further than that. And that's the first step to changing the way that you perceive yourself and perceive others.
Yeah, always. This has been honestly a really insightful conversation for me, because I feel like it helped me because I deal with taking things personally a lot. Understanding, like, that really humbling experience, like what the guy we're talking about with the wife having cancer, just really makes you realize that we need to start viewing other people as human. We need to stop viewing other people just as these robots who walk in the street. Like, these people have lives, these people have things they're going through. And the more that we can connect to that, the more that we can connect to other people, the more that those people will be able to see you too. And the more that you can bridge that gap of division. And ultimately, the more that you get out of your own head, the more that people around you will get out of their head, and the more that everybody will start to collectively, domino effect, be more present. And the more that we're present, the more that we're here, the more that we're grounded, the more that we can really make change, right? And we can really move forward without living so caught up in suffering and the ego. So I just think that if you're somebody who struggles with taking things personally, with always assuming things, just start questioning it. Know that you're not doing anything wrong. Like, I think a lot of this goes back to how we were raised, the pressure we put on ourselves, situations in which maybe someone really was thinking about you. Try to just come back, try to be grounded. And I think over time, the more you recognize these habits, you could really start to see that, hey, whoa, that's just a narrative I've created, and I don't even believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you end up being in a better place when you're able to question your thoughts and not give in to them and let them fester and become these larger things that take up all of your energy and make you miserable at the end of the day.
Yeah. So as we do, let's end this episode with the challenge. What I would challenge our listener is to, next time they recognize they're caught up assuming something, to really question it, to write it down, write to us. What was that experience? What did you learn about yourself? Were you surprised? Did you find out that the situation was not what you were thinking? And I love doing these little challenges at the end, because I think it can be a really helpful way for people who are listening to kind of apply it to real life. And for us to let us know, because then we can learn from that, and then we can share that and other people can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good challenge.
Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode, because it really helps us. But the goal is to help everyone at the same time so that we can grow and that you can grow from it simultaneously. And hope this episode was helpful. And if not, that's okay too. Check out another one or don't. There's never any pressure. We just want to put this stuff out there because it really is what we're passionate about. So we'll talk to you guys soon. And until then, have a good week and don't take anything personally.